Crossfire. On the left, Mike Kinsley. On the right, Pat Buchanan. Tonight, what price? Freedom. In the Crossfire, John Root, whose wife was killed on Pan Am Flight 103. Omar Cater of the Arab American Affairs Council. And Stephen Emerson, author of The Fall of Pan Am 103.
Good evening and welcome to Crossfire. A second hostage is free. Frank Reed, in captivity 3.5 years, was released in Lebanon today, driven to the Syrian Foreign Ministry and turned over to the U.S. ambassador. He is flying at this hour to West Germany. Meanwhile, at the White House, President Bush welcomed Robert Polhill, last week's freed hostage, and he expressed gratitude to Syria and Iran for helping to effect the release of the two men.
But I do want to take this opportunity to thank Syria for its role in not only bringing Mr. Polhill home, but its role in the Reed release. Similarly, to thank Iran for its role.
But behind those warm words lie bitter memories. Iran is said to have paid $10 million to have Pan Am 103 blown up over Scotland by Palestinian terrorists who today enjoy sanctuary in Syria. So tonight's question, the price of freedom. Michael?
John Root, the policy that George Bush is pursuing, although it's very hard to define, does seem to be working. So what is your problem with it?
My problem with it is that it is a problem that is addressed only towards a handful of hostages. I'd like to welcome Mr. Reed back to the United States, but I think that George Bush is using the hostages as an excuse to avoid an unpleasant fact. The unpleasant fact is that since 1983, the governments of Syria and Iran have conspired to murder 600 Americans, and he's letting that go. He wants to let that slide, hope to get reelected, and then go into retirement when the criminal investigation finally concludes, and he can just simply continue pitching horseshoes in Maine.
Well, just to get it on the table, if you were running the show, what would you do to Syria and Iran?
I would press our allies for sanctions, economic, political, military sanctions. I'd probably use a few of those cruise missiles, which are gathering dust now, and which we paid billions of dollars for, and lob a few over into the Bekaa Valley, get some use out of them. Otherwise, I'd like my peace dividend back, please, Mr. President.
Now, do you feel at all that part of this is an understandable emotion of someone who suffered a personal tragedy that the United States government sort of has to take broader considerations into account, among others the fact that there are innocent people, as innocent as your wife, in the Bekaa Valley?
Broader considerations, broader than the fact that 600 Americans have been murdered by the governments of Syria and Iran since 1983. I don't think that George Bush has a foreign policy. He has a Rolodex. He believes in the warm, personal chat. Hello, Maggie. Hello, Helmut. Hello, Hafez. And that's just not valid.
Mr. Cater, it is true that both Syria and Iran are strong evidences they are behind blowing up that airliner pre-Christmas, 269 Americans dead. Good evidence that they're behind the blowing up of the Marine barracks, Iran anyhow, and also the American embassy killed 60-some people in Beirut. Why would we want to deal with people who murder innocent Americans as really a matter of policy?
I don't think we have much choice. The Middle East is really extremely tough turf. We could go in and follow Mr. Root's example and bomb everybody, but that's not what America's national interest or national agenda is all about.
Let me tell you what, all right, let's set aside for the moment the use of the cruise missiles to attack the Bekaa Valley. What vital interest does the United States have that requires us even to deal with the type of people that run Iran, who engage in murder? Even today, the State Department said both of them are still backing up terrorism. What requirement is there for us to deal at all with regimes like that?
Well, the way we deal with them is the definition. Whether we work in concert internationally to isolate them, that's what we ought to be doing. It's not a matter of opening up and giving them fair trade agreements or dealing with them on a standard business as usual basis.
James Baker today said,
Mr. Cater, I have to straighten out your mic here.
Yeah.
James Baker today said, we want to thank the government of Syria and, quote, the Islamic Republic of Iran, which has demonstrated its influence in this humanitarian cause?
These are small tactics in a broader strategy. We have never been able to get international cooperation to combat terrorism. It takes international cooperation. It takes the Soviet Union to isolate these governments, and I think Syria and Iran are behind a good part of the terrorism.
I'm talking about today.
Go ahead.
The president is not the man to implement that strategy. President Bush is a warm, very likable human being.
I take the contrary view. He's just the man to do it.
He's a feel-good president, and feel-good presidents are great for peacetime when you don't have murderous governments like the governments of Syria and Iran after us. Unfortunately, Mr. President, I don't feel good. What do you propose, Mr. President, to do about me? Take the urn containing my wife's ashes and bounce it up and down on the Lincoln bed? And then what am I supposed to do? Take Polaroids? That doesn't work. That's not valid. You have to address the fact that Syria and Iran have killed 600 Americans.
But John, what President Bush said today was in essence 2 words. He said, thank you. It was not a major concession of any sort. If saying 2 little words, thank you, frees those other 6 hostages, the argument would go, isn't it worth it if you're not making any major concessions? Isn't that a positive accomplishment that...
The president has made major concessions. I feel very happy that another hostage has been freed, that the Islamic terrorists have deigned to reach into their barrel and toss us back a hostage or 2, and then we're supposed to overlook the murders of 600 Americans.
Omar Cater, let me get you in this, because I think Michael's point, he says that all we said today was thank you. We certainly said that, but we're also sending negotiators over to Holland to work with the Iranians to figure out how to compensate them for the victims of the Iranian airliner we mistakenly shot down, and to release assets of Iran's we've held since they seized our embassy. So we are making sort of concessions. We are dealing with these people, are we not? We're not even following your policy, let alone the one Mr. Root might suggest.
Well, we've got a whole complicated ball of wax here in dealing with the Iranians, the Syrians, as well as the Libyans, the whole Middle East. In Iran, we admitted there was a mistake when we shot down the Airbus. In admitting that mistake, we had to go through case by case and make, not restitution, but some kind of a settlement out of it. They've agreed and we've agreed. That's one area to begin the discussions, and we've continued it. That doesn't make a whole broad brush excuse for everything else Iran is.
But aren't they, Omar, aren't they really, look, they are, as Mr. Root suggests, they're tossing out a hostage or 2, and another one. Today they said, well, we didn't like your initial response to this. They're dealing them out in order to draw us back in because they got problems with Iraq, they got problems with the Soviet Union. Why? Your own country, why does your own country want to be sucked back into that vortex of hatred and murder?
But we're not being sucked in. We're taking it on a case-by-case diplomatic level, and we're doing it through the international courts. We're not being sucked in like the Reagan administration and behind the scenes exchanging TOW missiles or something of that nature. We're going through a judicial process. It's due process. We're saying how many cases were involved, and we're giving, not restitution, but we're settling those cases. There's some money going to the families of those dead Iranians. That's how we're handling it.
What about the money that's going to go to the regime, the released assets? You're talking hundreds of millions, maybe billions of dollars.
Billions of dollars. Those are monies we admit belong to them, but we're not going to give it to them until we get all the hostages back and everything else involved. And it's
That's
going
not
on.
correct. That's not correct.
That is not correct. After a CIA report came out last May that told the president that Iran paid $10 million to blow up Pan Am 103, the president then made the decision to release $567 million worth of Iranian assets when he could have had his lawyers stall for at least 2 years.
I believe Judge Sofair, the State Department legal counsel, is over in Holland, even as we speak, or on his way over to negotiate the release of that money. So it's really not correct to say that we're holding that money hostage until we get our people back.
We have been releasing pieces of that.
Why should we release any of it?
Well, the billions of dollars, and I don't want to be in a position here of defending Iran. The billions of dollars that are involved here are deposits of Iran in American banks that we refuse to give back to them until they work out all
Given what they've done, why shouldn't we confiscate the money?
Well, we have kept it for a matter of 10 years, and
why
we're
are we
giving
giving it back
pieces.
to the individual, Mr. Rafsanjani, who's behind a lot of these acts of terror last year?
I think you're probably right. We ought not to give him back anything until we bring to justice those people who are involved in downing 103 and taking all the American
excuse me,
hostages as well.
John, we got to take a break. When we come back, we're going to talk to an author of a new book about the crash of Pan Am 103 and find out exactly who it is who ought to be brought to justice. Pan Am Flight 103 over Lockerbie, Scotland in December 1988, which killed 270 people. Our guests are John Frick Root. Mr. Root's wife of 4 months, Hannah, was killed in the Pan Am explosion. He is an attorney in New York. Omar Khader of the Arab American Affairs Council, and Stephen Emerson, who is co-author of a new book, The Fall of Pan Am 103. Steve, we've been assuming here that Syria and Iran are responsible for the Lockerbie disaster. Is that assumption flatly correct?
Absolutely correct. The government of Iran paid for the bombing. It employed its diplomatic resources, providing its diplomatic pouch to transport explosives to Germany, where a Palestinian group led by Ahmed Jibril, based in Damascus, engineered the bombing of Pan Am 103.
Could Syria and Iran, if they wanted to, just press a button and get the other 6 hostages out?
I don't know if it's a matter of pressing a button. I think that they certainly, what we're seeing today, the release of those 2 hostages in the past 9 days, shows they have extraordinary influence, 1. And 2, they will do what's in their own best self-interest. So I think the United States is now going to be it's going to be facing the issue of what we do vis-a-vis Israel, vis-a-vis other statements. Should we express gratitude? It's my contention that, 1, no matter what we say, no matter what we do, the Iranians and the Syrians will release the hostages according to their own definition of self-interest. And right now, they want to get trade and investment and end their political isolation in the world.
Mr. Emerson, you mentioned they used a diplomatic pouch, an Iranian diplomatic pouch to carry the Semtex or the bomb material to Germany?
Absolutely. Investigators have now traced the trail of explosives from Iran to actually Yugoslavia, where the diplomatic pouch ended up, and from there was transported by car to Germany.
All right, I want to ask you a 2-part question. Well, how high up in the Iranian government was approval given for this, if you know, and how much of what you report does the American government accept as factual truth?
As far as what we know, and I should say what the investigators know, and I'm including American, British, and Middle East intelligence services, there is no doubt that the highest echelons of the Iranian government plotted the downing.
That includes Rafsanjani.
No, I don't know about Rafsanjani. It's possible that Ayatollah Montashemi, who definitely was involved, and a couple of other his cohorts, who are basically in charge of running the government, or have been, were the people responsible. I can't tell you, and neither can American intelligence tell you, that Rafsanjani was involved.
One more quick question. Let me ask you. Again, I want the American part of that answered, but how about Hafez al-Assad? Does he accept that Jibril, to whom he is giving refuge or sanctuary, who was his classmate in military school, does he accept that Jibril did the murder at Lockerbie?
I don't know if he accepts it officially, but I tell you this much. His government, his top military aide, the chief of military intelligence, has been an active supporter of logistical help and financial help to Ahmed Jibril. The Syrian National Airline was used to transport barometric fuses to help bomb the Pan Am flight. Number 2, as far as Iran, I want to get the story straight. It is no doubt in the minds of investigators that if Rafsanjani didn't know, he is certainly accountable and should be culpable for the actions of people in his government.
Mr. Khader, I see you nodding yes to some things, no to some other things. Do you accept the basic thesis that Syria and Iran are responsible for the Lockerbie bombing?
I think that that's generally acceptable. The problem, we don't have absolute proof of it.
Do we need
well, we've got to go after somebody. We can't go after a whole country.
Because here's the point. The point is, why should we deal? I mean, talk, communicate, deal with, as statesmen and diplomats, with people that do something like that.
Well, the idea is you've got to nail somebody, and the speculation is that Ahmed Jibril carried out the bombing for Iran, and that Hafez Assad harbors him. Now, Assad's response to that is, as soon as you can give me some concrete evidence that it was this guy, I'll turn him over to you.
Listen, we don't. Can I interrupt here? Ahmed Jibril has been living in Syria now for the past 15 years. He's been known to carry out terrorists. He's even admitted it himself. President Assad of Syria doesn't need any type of evidence. He can throw him out of Damascus the same way that Iraq threw out Abu Nidal.
That's right.
I'm not interested in the trigger man. Jibril is the trigger man. He is operating for Assad. He is Assad's right-hand man. I am interested in Assad and in the response of the U.S. government towards the Syrian and Iranian bombing of Pan Am 103. The hell with Jibril.
Jibril was an agent for Iran, is the general consensus, including within the PLO.
But is he just wandering the streets of Damascus perfectly free? Well,
yes.
that is rather damning.
It is.
Even if Assad knew nothing about it in advance.
And I think Syria should be isolated until it brings to justice Jibril and that whole group of terrorists that they harbor. And the United States is doing a pretty good job of isolating Syria economically and politically.
Well, except that right now the president's policy, Mr. Cater, is to basically forgive Iran and Syria when, when all the hostages are returned. That's what he has said. He said, there'll be forgiveness in my heart when the hostages are returned. Now, I think that he's got to go beyond that. I think he has to find out how we can hold Iran and Syria accountable for the deaths, as Mr. Root said, of more than 600 American citizens.
President Bush has said there is goodwill in my heart towards the government of Syria. I find this an obscene, revolting, vile statement, given that he knows that the government of Syria has killed 600 Americans since 1983. What is he thinking about? 5 of our senators traveled to Damascus to give Assad some credibility as a statesman. That's outrageous.
Who were the 5? Tell us who were the 5.
One of them was Senator Metzenbaum. I believe Senator Dole. Senator Dole's is out of control. No one knows what's going through his mind.
Merck of Alaska and a couple of others. And they didn't really, they chewed him out while they were there. They weren't there with hat in hand.
They slapped him on the wrist. I'm sure they chewed him out. Mr. Assad, do you realize that you have not come up to Western standards of civilization and behavior, and we're very, very disappointed.
Well, let's take Mr. Root's standards of Western civilization and dust off the, what was it? What kind of missiles you wanted to lob into the Bekaa Valley? And who do you kill in the process of doing that?
You aim them very precisely at the Sheikh Fadlallah barracks.
And who do they kill?
They kill the terrorist heads, which
and what do? You tell the missile to only kill
barracks.
Criminals, Mr.
Mr. Emerson, we come back, I'm going to ask Mr. Emerson what he thinks the United States policy ought to be and what we ought to do as a consequence of what he investigated and found.